Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another episode of the Take Your Shot podcast. Of course, as always, I am your wonderful host, Joshua Gitman, and I am sitting here on a beautiful Thursday evening after what was incredible playoff basketball displayed between the New York Knicks and the Philadelphia 76ers, and we'll get into that in a couple of seconds. We had also the Pacers taking care of business, and on Wednesday's games, we had the Boston Celtics advancing and the Dallas Mavericks making a statement against the Los Angeles Clippers. And with eliminations, that means more lights out. We've got three teams today that we are going to discuss in our lights out segment. Three Eastern Conference teams specifically, three teams that are considered contenders on the typical year in the Eastern Conference in this, I would say, era of Jason Tatum, Jimmy Butler, Joel Embiid, Giannis Antetokounmpo. I would say those three teams, a little bit surprising that all three of them lost in the first round. And then to finish it off today, we are going to preview our first second round series, which will begin this weekend. And it is the Minnesota Timberwolves versus the Denver Nuggets. But first, as I said, let's start with the New York Knicks as they survive and advance, defeat the Philadelphia 76ers in Philadelphia, which we should really call as a suburb of New York, as once again, there were plenty of Knicks fans at this game as the New York Knicks took care of business 118 to 115 in what was an incredible finish to the game as the New York Knicks win in six and they will advance to play the Indiana Pacers in the second round. In this particular basketball contest, the New York Knicks showed their strategy pretty early to start the game. It was pretty clear and evident that the Knicks wanted to get Tyrese Maxey off the three-point line. Every time Tyrese Maxey would come off a ball screen, another New York defender would come on the help side. They were really trying to emphasize on stopping Maxey. And on the defensive side of the ball, on the offensive side of the ball, the New York Knicks were trying to attack Tyrese Maxey as well. So I noticed that New York wanted to get Tyrese Maxey out of the game early, and they were letting Joel Embiid try to beat them, which is why Joel Embiid had 39 points in this game. And he played a great game, and it was because New York was like, "Oh, you're gonna miss some of your shots. We don't trust you, and you're not 100% healthy." And it worked, even though Joel Embiid did have the 39, as I just mentioned. He shot 12 for 25, and he missed 13 of his field goals in this particular basketball contest. So it was pretty clear and evident what New York was trying to do there to start the game, and it relatively worked to start the game as the New York Knicks, of course, were up 33 to 13 to start the game, and it looked like it was going to be a rout for the New York Knicks. And then all of a sudden, Buddy Hield comes off the bench for the Philadelphia 76ers and gives them a major lift to start the second quarter as the Philadelphia 76ers pretty much controlled the entire second quarter of this game, as Buddy Hield had, if I'm not mistaken, 14 points in the second half. Excuse me, that second quarter, when he was only averaging 1 point per game in this postseason. He had an incredible game and tried to do whatever he could to keep the Philadelphia 76ers alive in this one. And then the third and the fourth quarter were just back and forth action after Philly made the comeback to eventually take the lead going into the half. It was back and forth from there. It was players hitting big shot after big shot. And it was a physical, hard-nosed contest as the rest of the series was. And it was another classic finish to the game where, of course, New York got an OG Anunoby dunk. They were up 7 with a minute and change to go. It looked pretty much like New York was going to take control of this game. Then here comes Philadelphia. Tyrese Maxey hits a jump shot. Buddy Hield hits a three. They're getting a couple of stops. And then Philadelphia got the and-one from Tyrese Maxey, and we've got a tie ball game. And now New York takes it up the floor. And what Philadelphia tried to do on that final play where New York scored was they keyed on Jalen Brunson. Obviously, we know how big of a threat Jalen Brunson is, especially in this particular ball game where once again he had 41, and they were keying in on Jalen Brunson. I'll get into Jalen Brunson's performance in a little bit, and they were trying to do whatever it took to get Jalen Brunson's to pass the ball, to get him to pass the ball. But we saw in game one that was a little bit of a mistake. We saw that in game two. That was also a little bit of a mistake there, and in game four as well. And it ultimately cost Philadelphia in this one, as the guy who killed them in game one and most of the series, Josh Hart, killed them with that absolute wide open three to give the New York Knicks a 3-point lead. And after that, Philadelphia and New York played the foul game back and forth. Philly had a bad look to tie it. Buddy Hield bricked the shot, and New York held on in what was a absolute classic game between these two teams. And you've got to give credit in this series to Philadelphia. Give credit where credit is due. They looked like they were going to be out of it. They forced a game six, and they played pretty incredible considering how they had an awful start to the game and the fact that they came back and had opportunities to win this game, considering the circumstances of this season, considering the circumstances of the health of their basketball team, especially centering around Joel Embiid. Tyrese Maxey is not having a good game. You're going to have to rely on somebody else. And the fact that Joel Embiid played incredible with how we know he was playing, and actually in this game, he left the court and went to the locker room with 4 minutes to go in the first quarter, if I'm not mistaken. And he's just been an absolute medical mess so far in this postseason. And the fact that he stepped up and scored 39 just shows how hard he plays and how hard he actually fights and wants to win basketball games for Philadelphia. But as I mentioned, Tyrese Maxey wasn't playing that well, and Buddy Hield had to step up, and he really kept them in this game for Philadelphia. And it's unfortunate, the result for Philadelphia, but ultimately, with Embiid just not being consistently healthy to end the season, and particularly in this playoff series, the loss ultimately, even though I did pick Philadelphia, the loss shouldn't come as a surprise. And we'll get into them and their offseason goals a little bit more in the Lights Out segment later in the podcast. But I just want to mention that Philly played an incredible series considering the circumstances. It was probably, in my opinion, the best series in the first round. I think every single game was decided by 11 or less points. And the one game that was decided by 11 points was game three when Philadelphia was desperate to win. And other than that, every game was 7 points or less, and most of them were two possession results, and that was because of foul trouble and fouls at the end of the games. So this series was close every single game, and this series could have gone either way, and ultimately it bounced and fought to the Knicks side of things, and the Knicks got this done. And once again, for the New York Knicks, Jalen Brunson, he is a special basketball player, and I saw a stat at the end of the game. I think he is the first player to score 35 points and 10 assists in three consecutive playoff games since Oscar Robinson. Yes, the triple-double machine, the guy who played in the 1970s. That's how historic Jalen Brunson has been in this playoff series, in particular for this New York Knicks basketball team. And his play has just been absolutely inspiring and absolutely just a beautiful thing to watch on the basketball court. And he's really lifted this New York Knicks team to a whole different level. And when Philly started tying the game, when Philly started making the game a little bit close, New York got 2 huge threes from Jalen Brunson to extend the lead to 6. And then OG Anunoby got that dunk, as I mentioned, to get the lead to 8. After that, Philly came back, but Brunson hit those 2 threes at the end of the game were huge, as Philly were gaining lots of momentum, and they potentially could have turned up the Jets and won that game and forced a game 7. But Brunson really calmed things down for New York in that present time period, and it gave them enough of a lead to where they could ultimately hold on and win this game. And then for New York, you've got to look at this starting lineup, the consistent 5 that have been out there to finish basketball games. It's Brunson, Hart, DiVincenzo, Anunoby, and Deuce McBride. The 2 big guys, Hartenstein and Mitchell Robinson, have been solid as well. But those 5 guys in particular have played probably the best basketball of all of their careers. when you look at a guy like Josh Hart, who I mentioned hitting the game-winning shot in this game, we've seen him elevate his game. We've seen flashes of this, but not really on a consistent basis. We've always thought Josh Hart as a role player, but he has been much more than a role player in the series, making an impact both on the defensive side of the ball and on the offensive side as well in the series, which is something that is really not a strong suit. He's improved massively from the three-point line, and it's been really hard when you're the defense trying to keen in on Brunson, as I mentioned, when you've got someone like Josh Hart who can hit threes consistently and is not known as an offensive threat. And then you've got OG Anunoby, who has really provided great defensive length for this Philadelphia 76ers team. He really made Tobias Harris not a factor in this playoff game for Philadelphia, and he played absolutely amazing for them. Of course, DiVincenzo as well. He played the entire game, and he was guarding Tyrese Maxey the entire game, and Tyrese Maxey did not have a great game. Of course, New York's goal was to try to stop Maxey in this game, as I mentioned earlier, but the fact that DiVincenzo, the primary defender on Maxey, executed that to perfection, only holding him to 7 points, you got to give a lot of credit there where credit is due. And then you've got Deuce McBride, not necessarily the biggest player on this New York Knicks team, but he has replaced what the New York Knicks got from Emmanuel Quickley. And quite frankly, he might be better than what Emmanuel Quickley did for the New York Knicks. He might be playing better than that. And although he didn't have the best offensive game today, he hit a huge three for this New York Knicks team down the stretch. And he also, again, a very solid defender, picking up full court, causing problems for Philadelphia, and also being one of the defenders for Tyrese Maxey as well in this basketball game. Now let me go back to the Philadelphia 76ers for a little bit, and let me talk about Tobias Harris. As I mentioned, OG Anunoby held Tobias Harris to 0 points, and if you're Tobias Harris, as I mentioned, he had an incredible game in Game 5. I was praising him. And I guess I praised him a little too early because in this Game 6, he did the exact opposite, and he was a no-show for the Philadelphia 76ers team, and somebody who was supposed to be the third best player cannot do that in what is an elimination game for your basketball team. Not even taking lots of shots, 0 for 2 from the field, that was it. He was a minus 10 efficiency from the floor. Didn't really do that much else on the court, and if you're Tobias Harris, you have to assert yourself more into the game. I don't care who's guarding you. We've seen your scoring ability before, and Philadelphia gave you max money to be the third best player on the team, and he has clearly not lived up to that, and we will get more into that as well in our Lights Out segment as we discuss options for him and the rest of the Philadelphia 76ers. But 0 points is not going to cut it. Kyle Lowry as well, 0 points is not going to cut it, even though he hasn't been that great on the offensive side of the ball, and it's been, quite frankly, the worst year of his career and on that side of the ball. Still, in an elimination game, to have 2 starters score 0 points, that is unacceptable if you're the Philadelphia 76ers, and you potentially are going to have to make changes to that starting lineup. And then off the bench, Philly also got a good game from Nicholas Batum, and as I mentioned, Buddy Hield, but it just hasn't been that consistent from the starters this season, hasn't been really that consistent from the bench guys this season, and ultimately today it was the starters not being consistent with Lowry and Tobias Harris, as well as Tyrese Maxey having a little bit of an off game. He did score 17 points, as I mentioned, but he did not play particularly that well. So Philadelphia is definitely going to have to figure out some of those issues, and we will get to that later, as I mentioned. So the New York Knicks move on, and they will play the Indiana Pacers, who we will discuss right now. The Indiana Pacers took care of business in their game against the Milwaukee Bucks as they blew out the Milwaukee Bucks and ended their season 120-98, as it was a dominant second half for Indiana, a dominant fourth quarter, and a dominant first, and also a dominant start to the game as well for Indiana. not necessarily a dominant start. I'll take that back. It was more middle late of the first quarter because it looked like for a minute what Milwaukee was going to take control of this game early. I think they got to an 11-3 lead, and then after that, it was all Indiana for the rest of the game, as it was a consistent offensive production from each and every single significant player on this team. Siakam had 19, Nesmith had 15, Nemhard had 14, Halliburton 17, Toppin 21, McConnell 20. It was consistent from everyone, and that is what has been the beauty of the Pacers offense this year. It hasn't been one guy. It hasn't been just Tyrese Halliburton, even though maybe some games it was, but for a majority of the season, it has not been one player. It has not been Siakam. It has not been Tyrese Halliburton only. In the wins that the Pacers have gotten, it has been everybody. And once again, it happened again as the Pacers steamrolled on the offensive side of the ball, shooting 54% from the field, even though they didn't shoot as well from three like they have in most of the regular season. They got a lot of field goals up and they hit a lot of field goals. And the fact that everyone's scoring evenly for this Pacers team was just something that I really liked from their offensive side of the ball in this particular game, in this particular series. And that could be crucial in the next series. And we'll get to that series preview, probably not in this episode today, but we'll get to that probably in the Monday episode. I don't know when that series gets underway, maybe potentially Sunday at the earliest, but I'm assuming it's going to be Monday. So we will try to do that preview on Monday. But as I mentioned, that's something that could be essential in the New York Knicks series, and it definitely paid off in this series. And in Game 5, it was scary for this Indiana Pacers team. They had the opportunity to knock out this Milwaukee Bucks team without Dame, without Giannis on the basketball court, and they failed to do that, getting blown out 115-92. And they made a response today with Damian Lillard coming back for this Milwaukee Bucks team. Giannis was still out, and we'll get to that in a second. But overall, I really liked what I saw from Indiana on the court. They really protected home court like they were supposed to. After the slow start, they made a statement. And this team, a team that we did not expect to make a lot of noise this postseason, and for some, not even make the postseason, is moving on to the second round and is going to be a tough challenge for the Knicks. It's not going to be a cakewalk for the New York Knicks. 100% this will be an incredible series with the New York Knicks. Now going to the Milwaukee side of things in this basketball game. Bobby Portis, of course, played great with 20 points. Brook Lopez, 20 points. And Damian Lillard played great with 28 points. But Middleton had a terrible shooting night. 6 of 15, 1 for 4 from 3, something you could not have in an elimination game. And the entirety of that Milwaukee Bucks bench was a no-show like they have been all series long. And if your bench is a no-show, considering that one of your starters is Patrick Beverley, who doesn't score the ball quite often, and when you got only 4 guys who can really score the ball on this team without Giannis, and one of them is having an off night, so you really, in this game, had 3 guys who could score the ball at a decent rate, it's tough to outscore the Indiana Pacers offense for how bad their defense may be at sometimes. Only having 3 solid guys who can score 20 in this game and who can shoot the ball consistently and score consistently, as I just mentioned, it's hard to catch up to that offense. So they were pretty much screwed right from the beginning. Right when Indiana made that run, it was an uphill climb. They showed some signs cutting the leads from like 17 to 12. I think they got it to 9 once, but it didn't really get much closer than that for the Milwaukee Bucks. And for the second time, they are done in the first round. And again, we will have our lights out segment on them later in the show, but definitely something to keep your eyes and ears out for. We know, of course, Giannis was out this whole series, but still 2 first-round losses as the higher seed in 2 years in a row is something for concern, and something that I thought was absolutely shocking is the fact that Milwaukee did not play Giannis in this game. Giannis was doubtful in game 5 to play at home just like Dame, and then in this one, he was a game time decision, and ultimately, Milwaukee decided not to play him, and I know it's a tough injury to come back from. Ultimately, though, you have to play. It's an elimination game. You've your team's on the verge. It's a tough environment in Indiana, and your team needs a must win so they can force this game 7 and have an opportunity to win that crucial game 7 on their home court. And I just didn't really understand why Giannis wasn't playing in this game. Unless he was in that much pain, I I just don't understand, because if you're a game time decision, clearly you've shown signs of improvement. Clearly you're trending toward the right direction. Clearly you're practicing. Clearly you're trying to get on the court as quick as possible. And it just doesn't make sense to me why he would sit out in an elimination game, even with the risk of potentially re-injuring. This Milwaukee Bucks team has the path. I think they would have had an opportunity to compete against the New York Knicks, just like this Pacers team will. I thought they would have an opportunity to do that, and maybe who knows what they could have done against Boston as well. So we're not going to find that out, and Milwaukee ends their season with Giannis not playing and with what was a absolute disastrous season. And in this game, it was just like their season, absolutely disastrous. And that's all you could say about this game. There was nothing else really to say about it. It was just a blowout. Milwaukee didn't shoot the ball that great, 7 for 27 from 3. Milwaukee didn't hit their free throws. They missed 11 free throws in the game. And Indiana just outshot him and outscored him. And with the guys who are on the court, off the court, Indiana just looked like the better team without Giannis, and they should be. And they absolutely should be. And they should have closed out this series in 5, but they did ultimately in 6. So they will move on, as I mentioned, to play the New York Knicks, and that should be, as I said, a fun and competitive series. But let's move on to the number 1 seed in the Eastern Conference as the Boston Celtics complete the revenge tour against the Miami Heat as they beat them in 5 games, winning game 5 in dominant fashion, 118-84, as the Heat now are officially done, and this year they will not have any magic in the postseason. This game, as I just said, was a dominant performance by the Boston Celtics. It wasn't even close the entire game. It looked like Boston had a sense of urgency in this one, and that shows their character and shows their gritness and toughness, because if you're looking back to last year in the same scenario in the first round playing an Atlanta team, Boston had the opportunity to close out in 5 games, and they messed around a little bit, and they let Atlanta steal game 5 in TD Garden, and they had to go to game 6 and win a tough one in Atlanta. So this year they learned their lesson, and they did not mess around with this one, as they won by 34 points. Pretty dominant for Boston, but it was expected in this series, of course, without Jimmy Butler, Terry Rozier, and now Jaime Jaquez was out for this game for Miami. Even though Spo never likes to say excuses because of injuries, it's really tough to give the Miami Heat any chance in this series without any of those guys on the basketball court. So it's just expected. It was even surprising that Miami got the game in that series. And ultimately for them, they just couldn't shoot the ball that well this series, other than game 2, which is the only game they won. And they had opportunities in game 4. If they would have shot the ball well, they probably would have won. Even this game, they played pretty for how good Boston shot the ball. Miami went 3 for 29 from the three-point line. They shot 10% from the three-point line. They weren't even that bad from the overall field and that bad from the two-point range, but shooting 10% from the three-point line, missing 26 of your threes, you just can't really do anything about that, and you're going to lose the game every time. So we'll get into a little bit of what Miami needs to improve on the offensive side of the ball in their lights out segment. But that's ultimately why Boston pretty much blew every game out, because Miami just couldn't score the basketball. Boston is an elite offensive team, and you've got to keep up with them from the three-point line. And the fact that Miami could not do that, that's why there was blowouts every game, and there was really no chance unless they did what they did last year against Milwaukee and shot the lights out, which it's very hard to do against this Boston Celtics team, who is one of the best teams on the defensive side of the ball this season, can switch 1 through 5 and don't really like to give you a lot of opportunities from the three, as they shoot many opportunities from the three, and that gap margin in between their threes and their opponent threes are that significant, and it's really hard to catch up with them in today's NBA. So for Miami, you just couldn't really do anything in this game, and Bam Adebayo was really the only one who played good for them. Tyler Hero was a no-show once again, but we'll get into him a little bit more in our lights out segment with them. But let's go on to Boston a little bit in this one, as Derek White once again shined for the Celtics, scoring 25 points after scoring 38 in Game 5. He's really asserted himself in this series as somebody who can really be relied upon the offensive side of the ball. We know he provided sparks last year and in 2022 in the postseason for this Celtics team. But in this series, I really saw him look like a consistent scorer, someone who can create for himself off the dribble. We know he can attack the rim, but if he can create off the dribble and hit jump shots like that, the way he did in the series, especially in games 4 and game 5, look out for Derek White for a very long time. And look out for Derek White when looking for that third guy, because maybe that third guy, now with Porzingis out, it could be Drew Holiday, but I think it'll be Derek White, because I've saw what he's done in the past, and I've seen what he did in the series. And if he continues that, Boston, even without Porzingis, will still be in a good position to win their second-round series against Cleveland or Orlando and win the Eastern Conference Finals against New York or Indiana. And the fact that in this game that Tatum didn't even do a lot. Tatum only scored 16, didn't even take a lot of shots, shows the amount of weapons on the offensive side of the ball the Celtics team truly has. And of course, we know Tatum's going to step it up as the rounds progress, but it just shows how deep and how elite this Celtics team really is. And then Sam Hauser also had a great game for the Celtics, scoring 17 in this one, 5 for 8 from the three-point line. He has been pretty solid from three in this series, and if he can continue to do that off the bench and help this Celtics team a little bit whenever they got to sit Tatum or Brown or White or Holiday, just guys like Hauser and Pritchard in games going down the stretch in the playoffs can be huge, and they can be deciding factors in who wins crucial games. So if those guys continue to play the way they played in this first round series, I expect no problems for the Boston Celtics, and they should cruise past the rest of the Eastern Conference. And for this particular series, that's all I got to say about it. It was pretty much a dominance, other than that Miami absurd shooting night and absurd defensive game plan. And Boston will be moving on, and they should take care of business in the next one as well. But we will monitor them, and we will see how they play, as they will face a tough defensive opponent in either the Cavaliers or the Orlando Magic. And speaking of a team that has been dominant, the Dallas Mavericks dominated the Los Angeles Clippers 123-93 in their game 5 on the road in the crypto.com arena. And this one was close in the first half, and then Dallas really pulled away in the second half. Luka Doncic was questionable to play in this game, but he had an illness and had a knee issue, but he ultimately had to play because, of course, it's a crucial game five. It's 2-2. Whoever wins this will only have to win one out of the last two games in this series. And Luka even said it himself. He wouldn't have played if this was a regular season game, but he still played because it was a crucial game. And the Mavs got that game, and it paid off for him and that organization. And he had one of the flu games with 35 points, as I said, 14 of 26 from the field. And he was just a major, major factor, as he always is, for this Dallas Mavericks team. And for what was interesting about this game for Dallas was nobody else other than Luka really had a great offensive game in particular. It was Kyrie didn't have a great game as he has had in the series. And there was really nobody else. Daniel Gafford had 8. PJ Washington had 2. Derek Lively had 12. Nobody else that really had that 25, 30-point game to go along with Luka. There was guys here and there like Kleber who had a solid game with 15. Lively, as I mentioned, with 12. Jaden Hardy with 14. But there was nobody really that helped Luka Doncic out in this game. And the fact that they still won by 30 is definitely a concern for the LA Clippers going to game 6 in Dallas, because when Kyrie and Luka are on, and they are tough to beat. And they're even more tougher to beat when they play defense, because their offensive ability is incredible. And the fact that they have been playing consistent, solid defense to end the regular season, and so far in this playoff series, holding the Clippers to 109, 93, 90, 116, and 93 in the 5 games this series, shows that the Mavericks' versatility on both sides of the ball. And the Mavericks are a scary, scary team to play when they are elite on the offensive side of the ball and on the defensive side of the ball. Because if you don't score against this team, you know Luka and Kyrie will get their baskets, get their buckets, get their opportunities to shoot. So you're going to have to keep up with them on the offensive side of the ball, and that's hard to do when you're getting surrounded by this houndering defense with guys like PJ Washington, Daniel Gafford, who they got at the trade deadline, the rookie Derek Lively. Those 3 have been a significant reason and why the Dallas Mavericks defense has been the way it has been to end this regular season. And they can, in my opinion, if they play like this with consistent offense from Kyrie and Luka, maybe another player, depending on the game, with the consistent defense, I think they could beat anybody in the entire league. I don't care if that's Denver. I don't care if that's Minnesota or Boston. Dallas has the opportunity to win a title this season if they can play the way they have been playing right now. So shout out to Dallas. They will go home with the chance to close out this series, but you know LA will be hungry in that one, and maybe Kawhi will come back, even though they didn't win a game with Kawhi. And this was the first game in the series that they lost without Kawhi. So that'll be an interesting storyline for the Clippers going in to game 6. But in this particular game, it was a disaster for James Harden, minus 25, plus minus. He was 2 for 12 from the field, 1 for 7 from the three-point line. And once again, for how much we've been praising Harden in the series, we've seen him in these past playoffs. We've seen what he has done with the Philadelphia 76ers, and he has been a no-show in a lot of these series. And if this continues, Dallas will win game 6, and the Clippers are going to Cancun. And what was funny going to this Cancun thing, going a little bit off topic, the Clippers put on their stadium that flight from Dallas to Cancun, assuming that this series would be over in 6 games in Dallas, and Dallas would be enjoying their off season. And that didn't really work out well. I thought it was a quick little funny nugget, and Dallas saw that as they were walking into the stadium, and I guess part of that they took a little bit personally, and they really gave it to the Clippers in this game. But going back to Harden, it's just unacceptable to really play like that, considering that you're supposed to be the offensive guy along with Paul George when Kawhi Leonard's not on the floor. And in a crucial game 5 where you have home court advantage and where you have the opportunity to be one game away from a second round date with the Oklahoma City Thunder, it's just really disappointing because we know what Harden's skill set is. We know what Harden is capable of doing, and the fact that he continues to let down his teams, let down fans, let down his organization, his teammates, his coaches. It's something that we don't want to see, but it keeps on happening, and it's a vital concern for this Los Angeles Clippers team, especially going into a crucial Game 6, and Harden is going to have to make a statement in that one if the Clippers are going to want to survive and advance. And other than that, nobody really had a great offensive game for the Clippers, like James Harden. George scored 15, Zubac 15, Terrence Mann 15, and they didn't really shoot the ball that well, 38%. Credit to Dallas's defense, 25% from the three. And they're going to have to make, as I said, a statement in Game 6, and ultimately that's going to be tough to do. I picked the Clippers in 7. It's hard for me to stick with that pick right now, but I'll stick with it because I don't want to change my picks. But that's going to be very tough to do, and we'll see, as I said, if Kawhi Leonard comes back for that particular ball game. But let's move on to our Lights Out segment, and let's first start with the 8th seed in the Eastern Conference, the Miami Heat, as they say lights out. And as a Heat fan, it's just unfortunate, but we've been dominating the East for a lot of years, so maybe it's time to take a step back for one season. So for Miami in this offseason, they have a decent amount of free agents. Player options include Caleb Martin, Thomas Bryant, Kevin Love, and Josh Richardson. They will all have player options they can accept or decline and go into free agency. DeLon Wright, Patty Mills, and Haywood Highsmith are unrestricted free agents. And restricted free agents are Jamal Cain, Alonzo Williams, and Cole Swider. Miami has the 15th and the 43rd draft picks in this NBA draft this season. Now, for Miami, clearly, as I mentioned in our recap of their game, they are in need of an efficient offensive scorer and an offensive upgrade. And that is something they tried to buy last offseason by getting and trying to acquire somebody like Damian Lillard, who specifically wanted to go to that team. Ultimately, they didn't get the deal done for reasons we won't get into and reasons I still have my opinions on as a Heat fan. But at the end of the day, they didn't get Damian Lillard, and now they are going to need an offensive punch from somewhere, and maybe that's Donovan Mitchell. Maybe that's shooting for a guy like Trae Young. Maybe it's getting some multiple offensive pieces that you can have off the bench, like a Buddy Hield in free agency, or like just somebody like that. I don't know, but Miami needs offensive scoring immediately, and that's going to be tough because their finances are a little bit tough, and if they want to potentially get a guy like Donovan Mitchell, they're going to have to give up somebody like a Nikola Jovic or somebody like a Jaime Jaquez. And, of course, Tyler Hero will be included in any trade package, and I think no matter what happens this season, whether Miami trades for a star or not, I think they need to move on from Tyler Hero because Tyler Hero has just not been that great of a fit for this Miami Heat team, and Tyler Hero has just not been the offensive punch that Miami has needed him to be, and it really showed in this postseason as most games he was a real no-show except for that game to win in Boston. And we just haven't seen him play consistently enough. He hasn't been healthy for the Heat team. And he just doesn't really fit the culture. He doesn't play great defense. He doesn't really do that much in that many minutes. And I think he would be better off personally as a six-man. And he was great in that role. He won Six-Man of the Year in 2022. Gets instead of 35 to 40 minutes a game, more in the 30s, but he can still play at the end of the games. It's just leading the bench unit, getting his opportunities there. I think that would be much better for his efficiency and his liabilities on the defensive side of the ball, whether that's with Miami or whether that's with another team. I think that needs to be fixed for him, but ultimately, I think he has to go. And I also think Miami's going to need a backup center and a backup point guard, maybe even a starting center you can play alongside Bam, because maybe they got to try something new here because Bam, he's a 6'9" starting center. Even though he's a physical guy, hard nose guy, maybe open up the offense a little bit. Maybe get somebody in there that can be physical for Miami, get some rebounds, which is something they're not good at, get some blocks, which is something that Miami is the worst at in the NBA. And I think that would help Miami a little bit. It would be a new look, but it would be interesting to view. Maybe get a guy like Isaiah Hartenstein, maybe throw some money at him. And of course, this will all this stuff I'm talking about is going to have to take sacrifice. Like, of course, Caleb Martin may leave for more money. Haywood Highsmith may have to leave. DeLon Wright may have to leave. But that's what it's going to take if Miami wants to improve their roster. They're going to have to give up some of their decent players that they've had here for years, like Caleb Martin, and some new guys like DeLon Wright, in order to get to where they want to be. And ultimately, that's the name of the game. And it's going to be an interesting offseason for Miami, and we'll see what happens, because if they don't get a star, Jimmy Butler, the conversations of Miami getting a little bit younger, not necessarily rebuilding, but reloading, getting a little bit younger. His extension has to be signed soon if he doesn't want to be a free agent next season, because I'm assuming he will decline his player option, and that will be an interesting storyline for Miami going down the offseason as well. They also have to extend Bam, but I'm not really worried about that for them. But the Jimmy Butler extension could also be a little bit intriguing for this Miami Heat team. We'll see what happens there, but I think that'll only be a situation if Miami does not get any stars, because if Miami gets a star, I think they'll once again put all their chips at the table, put all their chips where their mouths are, extend Butler, extend maybe a guy like Donovan Mitchell or Trae Young, and just go out for the next 2 to 3 years and try to compete for championships one last time with Jimmy Butler. And that's all I got for the Heat. They've got to work on their finances. They've got to get some bench depth, as they're going to lose some guys, and they got to get a star. And I think this might be the year that Miami finally does that. But let's go on to the Milwaukee Bucks. As we say, lights out to the Bucks for the second time in the first round in the past 2 seasons, as they lost to Indiana in 6 games, as I mentioned before, and the year prior they lost to Miami in 5. Of course, we know what a disastrous season this was for Milwaukee, from the firing of Adrian Griffin to this tiring of Doc Rivers to the defensive inefficiencies to Chris Middleton not being consistent. There has been a lot of struggles for this Milwaukee Bucks team, and they've really got to find ways to improve this team, and that's going to be really hard to do, considering that they don't have a lot of money, they don't have a lot of draft capital, and they don't really have the trade assets to potentially get better. Their free agents this offseason are Patrick Beverley, Danilo Gallinari, Jay Crowder, Thanasis Antetokounmpo, and Ty Washington. Those are all unrestricted free agents, and I'm assuming a few of them are going to go for more money, especially Beverley and Crowder, considering that Milwaukee just doesn't have the cap and doesn't have the flexibility in this new CBA world to retain those guys back. And they're going to have to find ways to convince people to get less money, come for the minimum, have players take pay cuts, and that's something that in the NBA doesn't really happen that often. And the Bucks might once again be screwed in bench depth unless they make a trade with a significant player like a Brook Lopez or a Chris Middleton and get a couple of guys to improve the bench depth. Other than that, there's really nothing that this Milwaukee Bucks team can do. They're just going to have to run it back, and I think if they can figure out their issues, I think they can be the second best team in the Eastern Conference. Will they get past Boston? Probably not. Could they make a series like that interesting? Absolutely. But there's just really no scenario where I see them getting better than Boston, really improving this roster to the significant extent that they probably have to improve this roster. It's going to be an interesting offseason because maybe they make a bold move like they did last year, trading Drew Holiday, with making a move like sending Chris Middleton or Brook Lopez out. We'll see what happens there. But of course, we don't know what Milwaukee's thinking. We don't know what Damian Lillard's thinking, even though he's shown some frustration, and that could be interesting. I don't see anything happening there, but look out for him in this offseason, seeing some frustrations. I don't expect him to request a trade quite yet, but if these issues start lingering into next season, you could see something in the 2025 offseason with him. So I don't really have a lot on this Bucks team. They just have to try to find ways to get some guys, minimize minimal kind of deals, and they've got to maximize on the draft. Actually, they don't even have a draft pick because of the Drew Holiday trade, the first round pick. So they can't even do anything there. So it's going to be interesting to see what happens there. But let's go on to the Philadelphia 76ers. As we say now, lights out to the 76ers. The 76ers, of course, just lost to the New York Knicks in what was a classic series. And this offseason, they've got basically their whole roster, except for Embiid and Maxey, entering free agency. I'll just go down the list. You got Nicholas Batum, Robert Covington, KJ Martin, Tobias Harris, DeAnthony Melton, Kelly Oubre Jr., Mo Bamba, Kyle Lowry, Cameron Payne, Buddy Hield. Tyrese Maxey actually is entering free agency. He's restricted, but I'm not too worried about that. And then Shaquavion Smith is also restricted for this Philadelphia 76ers team. So their whole roster is essentially entering free agency. I would expect Nicholas Batum to resign. I would expect Kyle Lowry to definitely resign. But other than that, it's those two guys. I think it's anybody can leave, anybody can go anywhere else for more money. And it'll be interesting to see what Philadelphia does, because now with all these guys off the books, they have cap room. They have the potential room to get a star, maybe somebody who's been linked to them all season, and a Paul George, maybe a DeMar DeRozan. But Philadelphia is in a position to get a third star and a third player to help this Philadelphia 76ers team contend. And of course, that third player was supposed to be Tobias Harris, and his major contract, this 5-year ridiculous contract, is finally over. And of course, he will get less money than he did in 2019, 2020. And if I'm Philadelphia, I would just let him walk. I don't think he's a great fit on the team. Just hasn't been performing the way they want him to. And I think it's best that they move on, give that money to whether that's retaining some of their free agents, and of course, as I mentioned, getting that star player that they so desperately potentially need to compete in this Eastern Conference with Boston. And overall, for this Philly team, not really in a sense of panic, in a sense of urgency, in a sense of a position, oh, you're screwed, because we know what they did when Embiid was healthy. They were the third seed in the East. I think they were second at some points. This team is really good when they are fully healthy, and we've seen that. And they just faced against a tough New York Knicks team with an Embiid that wasn't fully healthy. So when Embiid gets fully healthy, along with the development of Tyrese Maxey, I expect this team to be fine. Whoever's supporting them, they'll be fine, and they'll be at the top of the East once again. So there's no really panic button for them, but they do need to try to find ways to contend, because this is, again, even though, as I mentioned, Embiid was hurt, this is another year of Embiid not getting past the second round. It's been years. It's been ever since 2018. They haven't made it past the second round. It's been 7 years already, and they haven't done that. So with Embiid, so changes are not necessarily going to have to be made significantly, but they are going to have to make moves to help them contend. So again, for them, not urgent, but definitely a necessity for them. I would like, as a wish list, even though I think Batum and Kyle Lowry are coming back, I hope that they get Kelly Oubre Jr. back, and I hope that they get a guy like D'Anthony Melton back. But other than that, I think it's fair game for anybody. Anybody can leave, anybody can come back, because some of these guys, even as I just mentioned, like Kelly Oubre, he may get some more money on the market. Buddy Hield may get some money on the market as a shooter. Cam Payne could get some money in the market. D'Anthony Melton could also get some money. So they're going to have to pick and choose some players, but at the same time, saving enough money to where they can go out for the whale, from where they can go out to the superstar. And most of their offseason will be in the free agency. So we'll see what happens there for Philadelphia, and we'll see how their roster stacks up going into next season against the Boston Celtics. And finally, moving on to our last thing of the day, our first second round preview, the Minnesota Timberwolves, who defeated the Phoenix Suns in 4 against the number 2 seed Denver Nuggets, who defeated the Lakers in 5, not 6. Of course, in this series, we have what is a team that is the defending NBA champions, and we have an up-and-coming rising team in the Minnesota Timberwolves. In the regular season, Minnesota and Denver split. Minnesota winning 110-89 on November 1st in Minnesota. Denver winning 115-112 on March 19th in Minnesota as well. Timberwolves winning 111-98 on March 29th in Denver. And the Nuggets winning that crucial game, which ultimately got them home court advantage in the series on April 10th, 116-107 at home. In this series, you're going to have a battle of what is a big man superstar in Nikola Jokic, someone who can really assert themselves and can really set up opportunities for others against the Minnesota's defense, who is clearly and has been the most definite number 1 defense in the league. Most likely, if I'm assuming Chris Finch is going to be out there coaching and game planning, I'm assuming that he is going to put Karl-Anthony Towns on Nikola Jokic. But the thing about that is, even if Nikola Jokic beats Towns, because Towns is not the best defender, he's a decent defender, but he's not the best defender. At the rim, you've got probably what is the best help defender in the league in Rudy Gobert. So even if Jokic does beat that initial defender in Towns off the dribble, Gobert will be there to the rim. So if I'm Minnesota in this series, I would say one of the keys is letting Jokic score. Let Jokic get his buckets, because you know what you have with Rudy Gobert on the interior with Jokic. Let Jokic get his points. Let Jokic do what he wants. Stop the others. Stop a Michael Porter Jr. from getting hot. Stop a Kentavious Caldwell-Pope from getting hot. Stop a Jamal Murray from continually elevating his game in the postseason. And stop Aaron Gordon from getting easy dunks in the dunker spot. And if Minnesota can do that, they can make this series, quite frankly, a one-sided series. I mean, I wouldn't say that personally to Denver, like them getting swept or losing in 5, but I think Minnesota can dominate a lot of games in this series if they execute that game plan to perfection. Of course, they're not going to sweep or win in 5, because if they do that, Jokic is going to have a couple of good games. But can you rely on Jokic to give you 50 every night? For how good he is, I just can't say yes to that answer. He can prove me wrong, of course, and I wouldn't be surprised if he does. But Rudy Gobert is one of the best help defenders in the league, and he can cause Jokic some problems. So if you're Minnesota, you just worry about the other guys, because those other guys have really been carrying Denver on the offensive side of the ball. And going to Aaron Gordon a little bit on Minnesota's strategy and Denver strategy, Minnesota definitely needs to limit Gordon off the dunker slot, but that's going to be a little bit of a problem if you've got Gobert helping on Jokic, which now Denver, it's crucial if Gobert does help on Jokic. Jokic is going to have to consistently get Aaron Gordon in the dunker spot, and I think this is going to be a huge series for Aaron Gordon, both offensively and defensively here, as he will probably be the primary defender on Karl Anthony Towns, and he will be crucial for Jokic's success inside the paint whenever Jokic gets double teamed. If Aaron Gordon can have a great series, I think that Denver will win this series. Denver should win this series. They're the better team. They've won the championship. I know how good Minnesota's been playing, but if it becomes a talent game, who's just better overall, I'm picking Denver on paper. Of course, Minnesota, if they can have some great offense along with their great defense, because their offense has been decent, but it hasn't really been that consistent this season, and they can get on cold stretches sometimes. So if Minnesota can turn it up on offense and limit Denver on the defensive side of the ball, which we know they're capable of, Minnesota will be in position to win this series. Now, for Denver on the offensive side of the ball, as I mentioned, they got to get the dunker spot to Aaron Gordon, but you've also got to find ways to get Anthony Edwards on the action, make Anthony Edwards work on the defensive side of the ball. And I think if you're Jamal Murray, you want to try to attack Anthony Edwards off the screen and roll. I'm not saying he's a bad defender. Anthony Edwards is quite frankly a great defender, but if you get him moving back and forth the entire game, you get him potentially in some foul trouble, you get him going non-stop back and forth, it can be tiring, especially in a place like Denver in those 4 games potentially that the series will be in Denver, because Denver has the altitude and it can really tire out some people. And if you're running Anthony Edwards around, both on defense, you're pressuring him on the offensive side of the ball. When Minnesota's on offense and you're on defense, Denver can take advantage of that, because Anthony Edwards is really the only one for Minnesota who we know for sure can be that guy in the playoffs, who we know can take over on the offensive side of the ball. Which is why that if Denver can limit Anthony Edwards in the series, it can make Anthony Edwards tired a little bit, wear him out. Denver will be in good shape there. And also for Denver, I think they're going to have to find ways to expose the Mike Conley matchup. I know Mike Conley is been decent this year, but he's their worst defender. And if they can get KCP off the pick and roll from Jokic, off the DHO for a jump shot, get him on the interior, collapse the defense, I think Mike Conley is a matchup that KCP can expose. I think Contavious is a much faster and much more of a offensive threat than people perceive him to be. So if they can get Mike Conley in some foul trouble, or get KCP advantages from his speed and outbeating Mike Conley, I think that will be crucial for Denver, because if you get Mike Conley out of the game, even though we know Anthony Edwards is a ball handler, Mike Conley is the center of that Minnesota offense. You're going to have to find ways to limit him, and that's going to be difficult. And you're going to have to do it just like Anthony Edwards on the defensive side of the ball. I think if Denver can find ways to stop the 2 guards in this series, Denver will be at a huge advantage, and I think Denver can win the series in 5. If Denver cannot find a way to stop the guards, this series can get a little bit more interesting. I'm not saying this is Denver's series to lose, because you've got to give credit to what Minnesota has done all season. And if Minnesota puts up the defensive performances that they have this season, Minnesota will be in the series. But Denver definitely has the upper hand in this series, and if they take care of business, if they play the way we know they can play, they should win the series. Because for how good Minnesota plays, even if they have a great offensive game, even if they have a great defensive game, Denver could still beat them a couple of games. But if Denver plays their best, they are arguably unbeatable in this league, which is why I'm personally in the series. It's a tough choice because I know how good Minnesota has been playing and the rising star Anthony Edwards. But I'm going to take in this series Denver in 6, maybe 7, definitely not 5. I'm leaning towards closer to 7 than 5, but I'll take Denver in 6 games to move on to the Western Conference Finals. But quickly before we go, after I make this pick, I forgot to mention for Minnesota, Jaden McDaniels will be huge on Michael Porter, because Michael Porter has been hot this first round. If he can limit Michael Porter's 3-point shots and make this a more defensive kind of a series, Minnesota will be in that position. being an advantage to win the basketball games in this series, because I'm telling you, if it's a high scoring game, I got Denver. If it's a defensive kind of a grit grind game, I got Minnesota in those kinds of games. So it'll be interesting to see who controls the pace of this series. But Denver, to me, looks like they have the advantage. And that is all the time we have for you today. Thank you so much for watching the Take Your Shot podcast. And remember to please follow me on Instagram at take_your_shot_podcast_. That's at take_your_shot_podcast_. And tell me how you would have taken your shots on these takes. That's all my shots for the day. Have a great weekend. Enjoy game sixes tonight, potential game sevens on Sunday. Second round action starting with Minnesota and Denver. We've got a great weekend of playoff basketball, and we'll recap it and preview some more playoff basketball on Monday. Thank you so much. Leave a like and subscribe. See you next week.